Welcome to Carrying Wayward, a supernatural podcast for fans who aren't ready to let go and newcomers to the series who are ready to jump in. I'm Drew Schulman.
And I'm Marie Vigourou. In this episode, we're diving into Supernatural Season 8, Episode 12, As Time Goes By. Let's get this show on the road.
Despite this episode containing time travel, which I know you were less of a fan of than I am,
I hate it.
the road so far made it very obvious who the little kid in the bed was. Like, immediately I had no questions about it being, like, Baby John.
Baby John!
But despite this being a somewhat John-centric episode plotline, despite him not being in it, but him being very present contextually, and the time travel, and some other things we'll talk about, I like this episode. I like the implications.
The thing is that this is the kind of time travel that I can get behind. There's no changing the past. He left a past timeline and he disappeared forever because he died, like, in the future. I'm fine with that. What bugs me is when people go back in time in order to change the past. That, cannot do.
My only gripe with this episode is, and maybe you can talk me through it, their plan was stupid?
Oh yeah, it was stupid. I mean, like, this was clearly plot for plot, right? Like, they needed Henry to die. I can't talk you into liking it because it's not good. It's fine, right? Like,
Dean does say a line to him of, like, you'll have to get close for this to work. Why? It's a gun. Kind of the point of those things is the range they give you. Like, yes, you want to make sure you hit the target. I understand that, and maybe being slightly closer increases your odds. But I don't think point blank was necessary.
oh my god.
Maybe he could have made a comment about, like, choosing to get that close because he didn't want to risk missing the shot. He's never fired a gun before. And even that would have been like, okay, I'm fine. I'm writing headcanon to make it make sense.
This is one of those times where I'm like, okay, they needed this to happen and they just didn't, put in all that much effort for it to happen. They just needed it to happen. And I'm honestly, for the kind of episode that this is, I'm kind of okay with it. Like, I don't need this to be a masterpiece.
That's my only gripe with an otherwise pretty spectacular episode. I mean, we get family heritage, like, lore. We get, like, completely new lore. Even if we never use it again, the idea of putting the devil trap on a bullet is such a cool idea. Like, even if this is a one-off, cool. If it comes back again, even better.
This week, patrons and coffee supporters got to hear us answer the question, who is an ancestor you would like to meet? On the supporter-exclusive Impala Talk feed. You can go to carryingwayward.com to support us and claim your perks.
What a fun question. Like, I know we'll wait to get there, but, like, I had a lot of thinking to do with that one.
Technically, people have already heard it, right? Which is actually kind of trippy because we haven't talked about it yet. And yet, when people hear this, they'll have heard this already. All right, Drew, are we ready for the recap?
Count me down.
3, 2, 1. I like your top.
That's the favorite. I love them. We open on kind of like that classic, like, we don't know what's going on here. And there's this guy saying goodbye to his kid and wearing a weird cultish symbol on his tie. And then the revealed, it's a demon's attacking all of us. And he escapes into Sam and Dean's hotel closet because that's how time travel works. Because he's jumped forward in time and he's looking for John Winchester, who, surprise, is dead. Surprise, is our dad. Surprise, that's your grandpa. And then the demon who's coming after them shows up, is immune to the demon knife. It hurts her, but doesn't kill her, because she's a demon knight of hell. Awesome, love this. We learn about the Men of Letters, and that this was some sort of, like, weird legacy cult-ish thing that Sam and Dean and John should have been a part of instead of just being lowly hunters, air quotes. Sadly, we lose their grandfather Henry, but we do stop Abaddon with some cool bullshit, and we now have a mysterious key to a mysterious location full of mysterious knowledge time.
This episode was written by Adam Glass, directed by Serge Ladouceur, who is the director of photography on like 99.99% of all Supernatural episodes, and he's also a co-producer in the series. And this is his first of 3 as director.
Interesting. Ooh.
We're going to be talking more about that in Critical Time. And finally, the episode originally aired on January 30th, 2013.
So, what are the important takeaways from this episode? Because even I could probably tell you half of them, I think.
Yes, actually, you were very, very specific in your recap. I loved it. So this episode is actually the catalyst for like a lot of plot this season, but also in future seasons.
I'm excited.
We get a very rare shot of Jeffrey Dean Morgan in The Road So Far, which is actually quite fun.
It gave so much, and I'm like, why is there so much John content today? And then obviously it all clicks.
In this episode, we meet Josie Sands, who we find out is possessed by a demon named Abaddon. And I just want to highlight just like how freaking thankful I am to whoever thought up this storyline, because it resulted in the casting of Elena Huffman.
Loved her so much.
So on the topic of Abaddon, we do get a little more of a lore dump than we usually do. We find out that the demon knife doesn't work on her because she is actually a knight of hell. We also meet Henry Winchester, who is John's father and Sam and Dean's grandfather.
We also say goodbye to Henry Winchester, unfortunately.
Oh, yes, that happens very quickly. Dean says, I hate time travel, man, and me too, babes. Me too.
He says it like twice in the episode, and both times I sat there going like, oh, I know this is getting quoted by Mary at least once.
Absolutely. Oh, for sure. Oh my god. Dean, my relatable queen. We find out about the Men of Letters, and like sidebar, this is like a whole new like game expansion pack. We're going to be hearing about them until season 15. We're going to talk about that a lot more in Storytime, obviously. Henry explains that the Men of Letters are perceptors, beholders, chroniclers of all that which man does not understand. And like, Henry, are you saying that the Men of Letters investigate unexplained phenomena? Because boy, do I have the TV show for you. So we get a new very important symbol, which is the Aquarian star, the crest of the Men of Letters. So now we have this new important symbol.
Have we seen this symbol in the show before?
Not that I am aware of.
It had that vague level of like, I've seen this somewhere before and I can't put my finger on it. And again, I don't want to say it's a generic enough symbol, but it's a symbol that I could see being used in other mediums. And maybe I'm just thinking I saw it somewhere else or something similar. But I was wondering if it's going to be one of those like, oh, it's been littered everywhere in the series and you had never noticed.
Not that I'm aware of, because I think that at this point I would have noticed. But again, like, I don't know. There's a lot of episodes. There's a lot of episodes.
Yep.
We get our very first mention of Lebanon, Kansas.
I will admit, I think I pieced together that the key he was saving from Abaddon that leads them to Lebanon is the bunker. Still have no fucking clue what it is. And we've been using it as our Patreon thing for how many years now?
For many years.
I think I might be learning what the bunker is soon? Like, I hope next episode, but...
Let's hope. Let's cross our fingers. What is next episode? I'm just curious. No, our next episode is actually titled Everybody Hates Hitler.
Huh. I mean, it's an apt description.
Oh my god. Let's see what that episode has to bring us.
Doctor Who has the two. They have an episode just called Let's Kill Hitler.
Also an apt description of this episode. All right. We find out that John's journal was actually the journal that Henry was planning on using after his final initiation into the Men of Letters.
I kind of love that. Like, again, we'll get into that with story time and some of the generational connective tissue, and I really, like, it's cute.
So this was never mentioned before, but we gather that Henry basically disappeared from John's life when he was very young, and that he thought he'd just left him and his mom to fend for themselves.
I'm not going to touch that because it was never really, like, expounded on prior to this. Like, I don't think we ever even, like, mentioned his father before now, really.
I don't think it was ever mentioned before either, no.
Obviously, we know now what the reason was, and I guess back then they just couldn't do anything to, like, he was gone, essentially, so what were they going to do but assume gone?
Especially if John didn't know about the Men of Letters. So another lore drop here is that carving a devil's trap on a bullet essentially immobilizes demons, even Abaddon.
Might be a one-off thing, we might never see it again. It was still a gold star moment. If they reuse it, even better.
I do want to highlight one thing that Henry says before he dies, which is you're also Winchesters. As long as we're alive, there's always hope.
It's a good line. I definitely picked it up, and I was like, I like that.
Mm.
I feel like it'll have some concerning connotations later, but I like it.
Well, I mean, to me, it just kind of makes me think about the way that the story ends, right? And like how, whether or not there is hope at the end of this show, right? So that's the question.
Mm-hmm.
Sam does this work for me, right? But like he brings back the Cupid episode where they find out that like heaven busted ass to get mom and dad together. The Winchesters and the Campbells, the brains and the brawn.
It was mentioned in the road so far, so it was somewhat like on my mind, but I'm glad this is the kind of thing they spelt out, because we now know that it wasn't just this family of hunters and random guy who bought a nice car because Dean convinced him to in the past.
I know.
Like, what did he have going for him besides being kind of cute?
I personally love this idea of Mary Winchester just going for a himbo and being like, you know what? Fuck it. But daddy, I love him. Like...
Oh my god, yeah. So again, having this very, like, thoroughly, like, this really obvious connection tied together is like, I have so many new questions.
Right, and then the final little detail is that the key that they all work all episode to protect from Abaddon opens a super secure place with all the lore and knowledge about the supernatural that they could ever want. Like you said, you have a theory about that.
My theory is it's the bunker. It will become the new home base for, I'm hoping, a good amount of time. And it will have some ties to the Men of Letters history and some new information for them, which will be super cool to open up some new doors, metaphorically, in what is to come.
So this week, our theme is generation. And more specifically, what can be lost, what can be passed on, or what can be created in between generations. Now, the word generation itself has a Latin root that means to give birth, to beget. So in order to talk about this episode through this theme, the way I'd like us to, we kind of need to make a rare change up to our format. So we're going to start by talking about Henry and his relationship with generations before him, the relationship between John and Henry, and finally the relationship between John and Sam and Dean. Like I said, we can have a look at what's been lost, passed on, or created.
I love this. This is, again, one of those really rare moments, like you said, where we change the format.
So if we start with Henry and the generations before him, so like one of the things that we find out in this episode, very obviously at very surface level, is that Henry was a man of letters. And he says very clearly that like, this is passed on through blood, like from father to son and hopefully to daughter, but that's a whole other question that I'm pretty sure the men of letters didn't really consider. And what's basically represented here is like this idea of like a birthright, right? Like because Henry was born to a father who was a man of letters, then simply by virtue of that, like he has access to becoming a man of letters, right? Like obviously I've been watching a lot of Merlin and there's definitely that idea, right? Arthur is the son of Uther, therefore he will be king of Camelot one day. That's basically like what we're talking about. The thing is, like, I don't think we really need to go into that all that much further to kind of realize that this can turn pretty problematic pretty quickly, especially when we hear Henry call hunters apes and like unthinking, unwashed, shoot first and don't bother to ask questions later. I just find that can turn very quickly into a class or a race conversation or both.
I will say, one, we also do see Josie seemingly getting inducted before the whole reveal that she's Abaddon, so women are part of this club too, which is cool. The people of letters. It didn't feel that way to me until the way Henry described it, that it was very like Nepo baby kind of going on here. It's like when you hear about someone getting into an Ivy League school because their parents were alumni, they even use the term legacy, which I've only ever heard in that context. You know, not as in something passed down generationally, but rather like a air quote birthright or someone's inheritance because their parents had it too. Which is like you said, it can get really problematic. And I do sincerely hope the Men of Letters do allow in other members and just had more expectations of the descendants of current and past members through given how they've been depicted in just this one episode. I can't say for sure, but I'm choosing until further evidence to believe that it's a little more equal opportunity. They just expect great things from the alumni's children.
Well, so we are going to actually have a lot of lore when it comes to the Men of Letters. So that question does get answered.
Yay, happy about that. I hope I'm right.
If we want to have like a more generous interpretation of this, we can think about culture, for example, right? So like because we are born into a specific culture, we learn this culture and we have access to like the knowledge and the values that come with it a different way than if we are like naturalized into that culture. And this is what happens to Henry. Like because his father is a man of letters, he also gets access to like the knowledge and the values of the man of letters, for better or worse.
Until proven otherwise, I am choosing to see it this way, the way you described it, as I think it's more what they want us to take away from it. I feel like the exclusiveness of it almost feels like accidental in the like secret society sense of it. And I like it more as the idea of like the same way hunters pass down their traditions. This is just a much more hoity-toity, fancy pants version of it.
You know, this episode, like I said, like they needed to get to where they needed to get, right? And so I think that a few shortcuts were taken because there's more reflection a little bit later when it comes to the Men of Letters, right? So I think, and I don't want to blame Adam Glass specifically for this, right? Like just because, again, in a series like this, it's not always fair to do that just because like they have to get to a certain point within a certain episode.
As we expound on it, I'll learn more and we'll be able to be more judgmental if need be.
So if we talk about John and Henry, the obvious thing to start with is the fact that Henry disappeared or died before John could know about the Men of Letters. And like regardless of how we feel about John, and we know how I feel about John, this is like a huge loss in terms of his identity and his right to know who he is.
This does seem like a pretty troubling thing to have happen to him as a child. And given what we know of his parenting skills, I can unfortunately make the associations of how this kind of thing could mess you up in a way that would unfortunately create trauma you'd pass on.
Right. At the same time, we both know some people who didn't have dads and they're fantastic dads. So I completely disagree with that, actually.
It creates a scenario in which trauma could exist and could be passed on. A better person than John would not have passed it on or would have learned to deal with it and excelled instead of making the mistakes that he did.
I mean, he didn't even need to excel. He just needed to not abuse them. Right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, just not abusing them would have been, like, pretty stellar. You know what I mean? Like, just...
It was not a high bar for him to get over, and he still fucked it up.
It really wasn't. So, one thing that is created here, like we talked about, is trauma. Because the thing is that not only did John lose a part of himself through the loss of his father, right? But he also thinks that his father abandoned him and his mom. As I said, you guys know that I'm John's number one hater. And it's a tier. A lot of people can be John's number one hater, right? Like it's not a ranking, it's a tier. But I'm not saying this, and I want to be super, super clear. I'm not saying this to excuse him neglecting his kids as a grown-ass adult, but just to recognize that it's a big deal and that it would definitely be a huge trauma to manage and to heal from. And we do see that in the episode that John never actually healed from that because Dean says, like, Dad hated that son of a bitch.
It's not an excuse for John's poor parenting skills, but rather a piece of the puzzle that led him to be who he was. Sure, maybe having his dad around would have led to him being a better person. Maybe not having a dad but learning to deal with it better would have led to him being a okay father, period. Or maybe he would have been just as shitty even with a dad. Like, we can't know. What we can see the trauma it caused, and as you pointed out, that it's likely an effect on his actions and feelings as a father himself because he tended to kind of pass that hatred along.
Speaking of passing along, let's talk about John with Sam and Dean. After the loss of identity and the creation of trauma between Henry and John, we now have a passing on of trauma from John to Sam and Dean. And I think that that's mostly visible in the end conversation between the brothers when they wonder if John had known the truth about Henry, would it have made a difference in how he raised them? And when you take this conversation and you kind of put it next to the one earlier when Dean mentions that John hated Henry and Sam replies, and Dad made made up for that how? By being father of the year. I think that we're really seeing like a clear passing on of the trauma from Henry to John and to Sam and Dean. And in a way, like I think that the journal is actually like a perfect physical manifestation or representation of that trauma being passed down.
I mean, the journal's a great point. It's a great visual metaphor for what you're trying to get to here, and I love that. And Sam and Dean, who both grew up under John's trauma and came out different, benefits us as viewers so much as we get to see two different perspectives here. Like Sam's interest in who his grandfather was and what happened versus Dean, who just has the ingrained hatred from John and him. And we know John did not care for Henry, as, he was assumed to abandon him. And Dean recognizes someone who hurt his father, and though he has distanced himself from John a lot over these past, seasons, on a very personal level and familial connection level, parts of that still burn bright in him. Whereas Sam, on the other hand, always seems less like his father and is a bit of a history buff, so family history literally leaping out of a door to him and giving him a chance to learn the truth is more interesting.
I'm going to push back on Sam always seeming less like his father, because there's actually like huge plot points that show that Sam is exactly like his father.
I think more recently, like I think in the last 2 or 3 seasons, since season 5, The Return from Hell, I feel like it's been a little more pronounced. I definitely see the connections to John in some of the earlier seasons. I think one of my most key takeaways was a conversation we had during the Egyptian God trial episode, where Sam was starting to be more understanding of the actions he had taken and his like intentions versus like the guilt he was feeling, which I feel was his like first like really step away from the way John raised him.
Hold on, because those are two separate things to me. The fact that Sam is able to heal from his trauma doesn't make him different from John. It just means that he's a different version of.
Okay.
Like, I am very similar to my parents in very different ways, but like I have been able to heal from things that they were never able to, right? But that doesn't make me unlike them. It just means that I had access to better tools.
No, that is very true. I think you're right. I think to rephrase myself then, I feel like Sam's actions in this episode are less John-like compared to Dean.
You know what's really funny? I'm going to push back against that again. Because one of the deleted scenes of that specific episode has Henry say that Sam is exactly like John.
This is a man who's only seen John up until John was what, like, maybe like 8 or 9 in that scene?
So you mean John before trauma?
Yes, which is what I was just saying now. This is Sam being very different from John in the way he's acting, meaning he is healed slightly more from his trauma.
No. You're saying that John and Sam are different because Sam has healed from trauma and John has not. But now take them back to healed Sam and John before trauma. Are they not the same person?
But that's what I just said.
No, it's not! That's not what you're saying!
What I'm trying to get across is, let's just go to this very specific episode. Sam's actions in this episode, which Henry even agrees with me on, are more not the John we've known. The traumatic, messed up fuckhead we hate. He's not being that version of John we know. He's being something better, something that has moved on and healed, which is more reminiscent of a John pre-trauma.
I also do want to mention here that it's not only John who's lost a part of his identity, because now that was also passed on to Sam and Dean. And I have to say that conversation where Henry asks them like what level they are, like they have no idea what he's saying, right? And you can just see Henry's world like just falling apart in his eyes. Like it's truly kind of heartbreaking. Like you can tell that loss is felt from a generation who knows to a generation who doesn't. And it's also like all the knowledge they could have had about the supernatural, instead of having to learn from like a handwritten diary of a man who, by like all accounts, was a terrible hunter, you know?
While the line itself made me laugh because it was so Scientology like coded. Like, what level are you? I'm a grand 3rd level wizard after all.
It was very culty.
Very culty. there is something in that, like, I feel like, again, to go back to like other mediums using this like similar trope of like, seeing a generation that has lost touch with like their culture because they've, whatever reason, they've like didn't care. Like, I've literally watched like children's movies about like not understanding the meaning of Christmas because it's all commercial now, and they forgot the true meaning of like what it is to be part of their generation. Again, weird example, but it's what came to mind.
I'll take it. I'll take it. I'll take it.
It is a very powerful thing to see in him. As much as we kind of like said at the top, like, it feels like weird, like an exclusive club kind of thing. What they wanted to get across, what I really wanted to take, what I felt from this was the loss of them inheriting the knowledge he could have passed to them.
Yeah, there you go. Like, if we continue with this idea of culture, it's kind of like how language is lost over generation, right?
Exactly.
We have so many friends who don't speak the same language as their grandparents, right? Like, who don't have the same mother tongue as their grandparents. I find it sad. I find it sad. And it's the way of the world, right? It's fine.
Yeah.
I have a question here about something that happens in this episode, and I'm not sure how I feel about it personally. Because even though Dean's been kind of on a journey about accepting the abuse that he endured as a child, he's also very defensive of John in this episode. Now, that's not really my question, because I completely understand how you would be defending your abusive parent. My question is actually about the dialogue between Dean and Henry. So Henry goes, "I'm sorry, I wish I'd been there for him." Dean goes, "Yeah, it's a little late for that, don't you think? Well, it's the price to pay for upholding great responsibility. We know that. Your responsibility was to your family, not some glorified book club." And then Henry goes, "I was a legacy. I had no choice." And Dean replies, "Yeah, you keep telling yourself that." And I was listening to this and I was like, is this really about Henry? Or is Dean projecting? Like, is he seeing Henry as like the root of John's problems and therefore the root of his problems? Or is he kind of talking to Henry the way I think he would be talking to John at this point in his life?
I'm hard pressed to pick one or the other. Like, it's a great observation, and it seems like while Dean has had a lot of growth regarding his upbringing and specifically how John was the root of many of his issues, he can see that Henry did the same thing to John in a way. And in some ways, it's like passing of the blame, like a reverse legacy almost. Like, Dean is passing the blame up the chain to Henry for the way John was, which was the way that John was to him.
It's very Noah Khan, like, and I'm still angry at my parents for what their parents did to them, right? So I'd like to take a moment to sing the praises of our local legend, the man himself, Serge Ladouceur. So for those who might not know, Serge Ladouceur, who is the director of photography on almost like all of the 300 plus episodes of Supernatural, was born in the province of Quebec, north of Montreal, and very close to Mont-Tremblant, if you know the area at all. And yeah, and obviously I want to talk about him because it's the first episode of the series that he directed. And I'm like, I love this man. I'm not sure if it's because he's like from our home province or whatever, but like, I love him. I think it bears mentioning because if you watch the episode carefully, you're going to see that he lights his scenes very specifically. Generally, in mainstream TV, you want like even lighting, right? You want the faces of your talent to be evenly lit. But not Monsieur Ladouceur in that episode. He's actually using light to tell a part of the story. I noticed a few times that like Henry's face was intentionally unevenly lit throughout the episode. So parts of his face were in the light and then other parts were in the shadow. Now there's a few things that this can mean, right? In quote unquote, like traditional, visual storytelling in film. But since Henry wasn't dishonest or didn't keep a secret that we know of, right? Like he wasn't being shifty or hiding anything. I think that this was to kind of show that the moment that he time traveled, he started effectively like moving to the shadow realm, if you will, like that his death was inevitable at that point. This is the kind of stuff that you get when you ask a DP to direct one of your episodes. You get really cool lighting in scenes that are actually part of the storytelling. So we're going to talk more about Serge Ladouceur because, like I said, I love this man.
I'm even going to point out one thing I think he did here as well that was so impeccably done. Because I will say, one of the things I noticed for sure in the lighting was the way he lit Henry. And the first time it's super obvious is that, like, right at the beginning when he's standing in John's room. And it's in a moment like that where it doesn't feel out of place because it's a partially lit room. It's meant to be dark. It even gives the vibe of, like, who is this man standing over this child's bed, until you put it all together and go, oh, it's not creepy. It's the father saying goodnight.
It's not creepy. It's his daddy.
Don't say it like that. Oh, God, no. The point I wanted to make was just that they do it in a spot where it seems normal to do it, so that every time afterwards it's almost more noticeable, and you're now seeing it and going, why are they still doing it? Like, it's not the time to be doing it. We had the moment. It's such a good way of making it. Oh, brilliant, man. Merci beaucoup pour ça.
Merci, Serge.
This week, we have a message from Kayla. Before we listen to it, we want to remind you to send us a 3-minute voicemail. To respond to anything we discussed today or ask us a question, you can use the recording app on your phone and email us the recording at carryingwayward@gmail.com.
Hi, Drew and Marie. It's Kayla, or you may know me better as Kiki on Twitter. We've been talking a little bit back and forth about this concept of Swiftie natural. And you guys told me to send in my thoughts, and that's what I'm doing. Before we get started, I'm going to apologize. This is probably going to be lengthy. I am a big fan of music analysis for characters, and Taylor Swift is my favorite artist of all time, and Supernatural is my favorite show. This is a horrible combination that's going to bequeath much pain, and I'm so sorry. I did limit myself to 9 songs maximum for each character, so don't worry. We're not going through her whole 130 plus song discography. I'm going to start with Dean. I did assign each of Team Free Will one album that I think fits them, and for Dean, I think that album is Midnights. It's an album that's themed with a lot of self-doubt and loss, and just those thoughts that keep you up in the middle of the night. And that seems to fit Dean very, very well. A lot of the songs on that album I feel relate to him, some more than others, and some do suit other characters a bit more. But overall, I think if I had to assign a single Taylor Swift album to Dean, it would be Midnights. The man doesn't sleep. The man stays awake hating himself. He needs this album. I did give each character a list of songs as well. To start off with Dean, I had to give him Dear John because really, who else would get that song? Men named John continue to be horrible to our favorite people and characters. And to follow up on Dear John, I did think Would've, Could've, Should've also fits Dean very well, as that trauma that he experienced from John, the teachings that were instilled from his father are going to follow him for the rest of his life. And if clarity's in death, then why won't it die? I'm also assigned You're on Your Own Kid to Dean because the parentification of Dean is just, he became the only person that he could rely on. He's on his own, and he always has been. And he's not quite okay with that, but I think he knows how to live with it. I think Dear Reader really fits him, along with Antihero. Dear Reader because he just wants Sam to have the best things possible, even if that means sacrificing himself. And he thinks that he shouldn't be the one giving advice because he's falling apart. And in Antihero, he sees himself as the problem so much. Surely everybody else does too. And I did get a couple that are specific to some certain plot points. Namely, season 6, as that's what's fresh on everybody's minds right now. Bye Bye Baby and Better Man are just so well suited to that season 6 finale. The betrayal that he experienced from Castiel, realizing that what he thought was on his side isn't, and that he just wishes Castiel had been better. And Back to December is just, I feel like the eventuality of what he did with Ben and Lisa settling in. And then the last one is a shared song between him and Sam, and that's This Is Me Trying. I think the first verse of that song suits Dean so well. That man has so many self-destructive tendencies, And the second verse of that song is so very Sam. The man went through college. The man had everything he needed. He was so ahead of the curve, and then everything fell apart. And with that, we're going to transition into Sam. And for Sam, the album that I gave him is Evermore. I feel like it's a very emotional album. It's a very loss-heavy album, just as an overall feeling of it. It feels like a heavy album. And it feels like it's also a very hopeful album. Sam is the one of Team Free Will who has been through a lot, who has loved and lost and known that pain of losing someone he loves so much. And yet I still feel like he has hope for the future. And I did give him a little list of songs as well. Starting off, I gave him The Lakes. I feel like he has that desire to get out of the hunting life. He doesn't want to be here. I gave him Clean and Innocent for season 4. He's finally clean, and he has to hear that, who you are isn't who you've been. And I gave him My Tears Ricochet, and it's that feeling that he got when John told him, if you leave, don't come back. If I'm dead to you, why are you at my wake? Type vibe. And I'm apologizing in advance. Sad, Beautiful, Tragic is how he loved Jessica. It was a sad, beautiful, tragic relationship that ended too soon. And I gave him The Archer because I will die on the hill that Sam has anxiety and he deals with it. And it's just not seen that much because it's a hard thing to exemplify. I also gave him It's Time to Go. I think he's very good at recognizing when he needs to get out of a situation. Even if he doesn't always do it, I think he's very aware of it. And lastly, I gave him Mirror Ball. Sam is a reflector. He reflects back John. He reflects back Dean and Cass and Bobby. And somewhere in there, in all those broken, shattered, reflective pieces is the real Sam, who's just sitting there shining, trying to be his very best for his big brother. And lastly, I have Cass. For him, as of season 6, we've only had him for 3 seasons. 2 seasons, really. And I gave him the album Reputation because of a single line from the Reputation Stadium tour, and that is that he found a love that was really something, and then he went and broke the world for it. For songs, I gave him Glitch off of Midnights. I don't think he planned to fall in love with Dean the way he did, but he did. A Place in This World, he doesn't have a place. He feels so out of place here. I feel like vigilante shit, Don't Blame Me, Look What You Made Me Do. These are all so season 6 Castiel. This feeling of I'm doing what I want for the person that I love. I gave him You Belong With Me and Enchanted because I just feel like that's so season 4 Castiel. He wants Dean to be with him and he's so enchanted by him. And lastly, I gave him Castles Crumbling and Mary, That's Your Fault, and I'm blaming you. Don't blame me. Blame Mary. And that's all. I did have some for Crowley, so if you're interested, I can absolutely give you those. But I'm trying to keep this as short as possible, and I'm already over 7 minutes. I'm so sorry. I can't wait to see what you guys have to say and how we dive into Swiftie Natural. Have a lovely day. Bye.
So we're gonna start this off with me not crying.
Aww.
Oh my god, it was the line from the Reputation tour about Cass that just hit me so hard in the heart. I was super analytical. These are all great choices, and then we got to Cass, and I'm like, I'm a whimpering baby. To which Mary then silently laughed at me over.
It's just because he was just pulling, it was The Scream by Edward Munch, right? What's the name of that painter? That's just The Scream. Anyway.
If we're speaking of art, this voicemail was art.
Yes, absolutely.
Of the 3, I'm such a bitch for Cass, and I love Sam and Dean, but I definitely know Dean has a little more favoriting, and even I found myself leaning towards him. I think this is the biggest eye-opener for Sam I've had in a while. You picked my favorite album. Because I can sit here and ramble, listen to this for hours, I'm just going to be very, very upfront and just compliment you profusely on this amazing list you put together. And say, 1, no apologies, this was amazing. 2, yes, I want to hear your options for Crowley. I'm very excited. And anyone else that I know yet. Oh my god, Charlie. I might do my own Charlie one.
Okay, so the requests are Crowley, Charlie, and who else? Who else do you want? Garth?
Oh my god, Garth! I feel like an interesting one. Yes. Again, no like requirement. If you have them, great. If you want to do them, great. I will appreciate any content. Again, love Taylor Swift, love her music. Uh, just for Mary, I think I've re-listened to Poets Department like 5 more times since we last spoke about it, and it's grown on me so much more.
I kept telling you. I was like, it'll grow on you, I promise.
And like, I need you to know, you and the listener, like, it was not a matter of like I needed to be convinced it was good. I just knew I needed more time to absorb it and connect. And yes, it has not toppled my top album, which is basically Evermore and Folklore. If the two are one album in my mind, I can never separate them.
I don't know why. Like, there seems to be this idea that like artists have like to outdo themselves all the time. And I kind of like reject this idea. I think that like creating something that's different, creating something that's real and honest is fine. Like, why is it that you always have to outdo yourself? Like, and also like this kind of stuff is not going to like people are gonna like what they like. She has like how many albums? 11 albums plus all the re-records. Like people are gonna have their favorite. There's a little bit for everybody there. Like I didn't love Midnights all that much, and yet like I was so happy to get it. You know what I mean? Like it's fine. It's not that deep.
You have single-handedly done more to make me love Sam than I think anyone else has done in 8 seasons.
Kayla's like, oh no. Okay, well, Kayla, thank you so much. When you said that you were going to assign them an album, I kind of like challenged myself to write the lyrics that came to mind first when you mentioned that album with that character. So like when you mentioned Dean, what I wrote is, I prefer hiding in plain sight from Dear Reader, which is a song that you mentioned for him. The full line that I think is so Dean is like, I prefer hiding in plain sight, my 4th drink in my hand, these desperate prayers from a cursed man.
If she came out and said those lines were about Dean, I would not be like, yeah, it makes sense.
Right, exactly. It's like, actually, Miss Taylor Swift has been writing supernatural fan fiction this entire time.
Oh, the reveal, the prestige that would be.
It's like, stop trying to figure out who the muses are. It's actually Dean Winchester of people. When you mentioned Evermore, the first lyric that came to mind, and I was surprised by that, but it was a lyric from Ivy, and it's, my pain fits in the palm of your freezing hands. And like, I'm not sure why that came to mind when it comes to Sam, but I think it's this idea that like, nobody ever really took Sam's pain in their hands. Like, what I mean is that, like, we always look at Sam's pain as being, like, relative to Dean's often, where we're like, oh, well, yeah, Sam suffered, but Dean had it worse when they were kids. Or like, oh, yeah, well, Sam's had his life stolen, but so did Dean. And it's always, like, in relation to Dean. And it's, like, this idea that, like, his pain would be able to be held by somebody like as its own thing, I think is very moving.
As you said that, I was almost about to make a joke about like, well, Cass kinda does with the whole Lucifer in his head thing. But your point still stands there because we then have the comparison of his pain versus Cass, and it's like we basically erase Sam's pain to deal with Cass's pain.
Absolutely. And then when you mentioned reputation for Cass, obviously the first lyrics that came to mind were, look what you made me do. I was like, oh, look what you made me do. Because that's so Cass. Like, especially in season 6, like that is what he does. And it also made me think about that one scene. I can't remember if it's in season 14 or 15. I think it's 15. Yes, because I remember, because I'm like, oh, it's from the redacted arc. And I'm like, oh, yes, okay, that's what's going on. I absolutely loved this. This was lovely. I also love to, I was part of like I can't remember what it's called, but like the Taylor Swift Dean Cass bang or whatever it is, where like you write a fan fiction like based on a Taylor Swift song about these two characters. And so like I'm sold. I'm sold. So thanks, Kayla, for sharing your thoughts with us. All right, Drew, what is your reflection and call to action this week?
I have a lot of family that I have a massively varying level of closeness with. And since I've moved away, it's been interesting to see how those relationships have evolved. Really, this past weekend, between sending puppy photos, I saw a new puppy, to everyone I know, and the combination of also just like, it was Mother's Day, and that's a time where I tend to reach out to people who I don't speak to as often because I want to reconnect with them. It's given many of these relationships an opening to reconnect, and I'm luckily this timed up, so I'm now actively taking the time to allow these relationships to flourish and hopefully stay more open and connected if that is the relationship me and this person are going to have. So a reminder to do it, but I'm actively physically doing it as we speak. And you, Mary Anika, reflections or calls to action this week?
This episode makes me feel called to think about what I might be passing on to my child that I might not even be aware that I'm passing on to him, right? Like good or bad. So yeah, just being a little bit more aware of that.
This was Carrying Wayward, a supernatural podcast produced by Rochelle Castellano, hosted by Mary Vigouroux and myself, Drew Schulman. Thank you to everyone supporting us on Ko-fi or Patreon, especially our bunker supporters, Elle, Jeremiah Thomas, and Simone. We'd also like to thank Jake Lionheart for our music, and Jacqueline Tucci for additional sound editing. Head over to carryingwayward.com to become a patron or a Ko-fi subscriber, and for our merch store and socials. And rate us a review on Apple Podcasts. Carry on, our wayward friends.